Hello, everyone. I'm Saleha, and this is Chai, Chat, and Community. Tonight, we are chatting about children's mental health ahead of the National Day of Action Against Bullying and Violence, which is on the 19th of March. Meet my guest, Dr. Arun Pillai, Medical Director, Jacaranda Place, Children's Health, Queensland Hospital and Health Service, and Sarmita Gupta, a secondary school teacher. Hello, and thank you for coming to the show.
Hi,
Hello, thank you
Saleha.
for calling us here, Saleha.
Um, Before we start a very important conversation, uh, would you like to tell us something about yourselves? Arun, do you want to start? I'm just going alpha.
Thanks, Saleha. Thank you. Saleha, as you sort of mentioned, I'm a child psychiatrist by trade. I currently work with the Children's Health Queensland, which is the largest children's health service here in Queensland, as the medical director of Jacaranda Place. Just briefly, Jacaranda Place is quite unique in a sense that it is a campus-based subacute unit for young people with complex and chronic mental health needs, and it caters for the whole state of Queensland. It's based in Brisbane. We're very unique, probably in Australia and probably across the globe, in the sense that we are an organization which is built in partnership with consumers and carers, Education Queensland and Queensland Health. So consumers and carers and education has been part of this journey since the design and architect of the building was started, when the model of service was developed. And since having the service up and running since early last year, how we monitor the service, so we've got consumers, carers, education and Queensland Health as being part of all levels of management, and in that sense it's quite unique. Personally, I worked in child and adolescent mental health, both in public and private services. I worked across Australia. I worked mostly in Victoria and Queensland, and very briefly in Western Australia. So that's my experience in child and adolescent psychiatry. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. I know it's a broad topic, so I'm not quite sure whether we'll be able to cover everything. But I think it'd be great to kind of start the conversation.
Thank you. Thanks, Arun. Sharmita.
Yes, hi, Saleha. As you mentioned before, I'm a secondary school teacher. I have been teaching for about almost 20 years, most of it in Melbourne, but I started my teaching career in New Zealand. And I have been teaching in a few different types of schools with different types, cohorts of students. I have been in the secondary college scenario, so I have been teaching adolescents. And first, I must tell you that I'm not really linked with well-being department of any school. So all that I know of this topic is, what I have seen from my own observations, what I have seen in my classes amongst the students. So they may not be like, based on any sort of evidence or whatever, like a psychologist or a psychiatrist can tell you, but it's just from a teacher's point of view as I see
Sure.
my students. And
And we
what
need that too. Yes.
and what I have seen is that over the years, that bullying is quite a serious problem that affects children in schools, and it does take many forms. It includes, direct verbal and physical harassment sometimes, or indirect forms such as just deliberately excluding someone, or just targeting someone through cyber technology. So yes, bullying. I have noticed that bullying is present in the in the school scenario, in classrooms, in the yard, or just out there socially. It's a huge topic, as Arun mentioned, and I don't know if we'll be able to be able to cover a lot of it today in this, but we will try.
We'll try. So, hello, Chris, and thank you for watching as always. So, um, before I ask any questions, I'll just read out some stats that Arun, you and I talked about that I got from Beyond Blue. And I'm going to just look at my notes. It says half of all the mental health condition we experience at some point in our lives will have started by the age of 14, and over 75% of mental health problems occur before the age of 25. 1 in 7 young people aged between 4 to 17 years experience mental health condition in any given year. 13.9% of children and young people aged between 4 and 17 years met the criteria for a diagnosis of a mental disorder in the last 12 months. 1 in 10 people aged between 12 and 17 years will self harm. 1 in 13 will seriously consider a suicide attempt, and 1 in 40 will attempt suicide. My God, I'm getting just goose pimples reading this. 6.9% of children and young people aged between 4 and 17 had suffered from an anxiety disorder in the past 12 months. 1 in 3 young people seek professional help, and suicide continues to be the leading cause of death for young Australians. Arun, these figures are staggering.
They are. They are.
It's very concerning, very
Yeah.
concerning,
And we have
definitely.
known that for a long time, and it's not unique to Australia either. We've known that across the globe. We got sort of more robust data from the developed world, but it is a problem in developing countries as well. So this is not just an issue in the developed world. It's an issue across the globe, in different communities, different societies, and it is, the stats are worrying. Um, on the other hand, I mean, on a positive note, and I kind of really want to kind of bring that balance, is that young people and children and kids are quite resilient and robust as well. As a society, I mean, it's important for us to keep in mind that we are moving forward. We are actually doing better than what we did, a generation ago. And I think that's sort of human race. We always want to do better, and that drives us forward. So that's there as well. But these numbers are alarming, and we can't ignore them.
So
As
we know children. Sorry, Rinto. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying that as Arun mentioned that we are moving forward, I would completely agree with that because in the recent years, I've seen the well-being department in schools being so well resourced. I mean, there used to be a well-being department before where, all these cases of bullying or harassment or mental health problems got referred to. But now, I would say that the well-being departments are just getting more and more resource with psychiatrists, psychologists, well-being coordinator, and instant sort of, as soon as something gets reported, um, I've noticed that, I've seen that action gets taken, as soon as possible. So I would say, I would agree with Arun that we are moving forward, even with those terrible, statistics. I agree completely that we are moving forward with our, support, with the support that
Mm.
schools are providing.
Arun, we know kids have mental health issues. I think we are just beginning to talk about it. When we were young, nobody talked about children having mental health problems. So, what are the typical signs, and what should parents look out for?
Uh, I guess when we say when we were young, that's probably back in India. I mean, India, it's I mean, I'm thinking about India. I mean, we child psychiatry as a specialty is still in its early days in India, and it's still in its infancy. But this has been, when you look at sort of other parts of the world, whether it's UK or the US or in Australia, we've been sort of aware of these conditions, and I've been talking about that for a long time. So we've got history and evidence from a very long time around, uh, which is important because that actually tells us what works for these difficulties as well. Now, signs and symptoms, it's quite broad, and it can be very different depending on the age of the child. So there are, as we know, I mean, we've all got, life has got stress in it. Life, when you really think about it, if you sort of think about life, part of life is about being successful and being happy and being positive and feeling like the world is actually working with you. And on the other side, life can be quite stressful and challenging and at times quite distressing. And some of these things are quite sort of natural and typical in innocence. What I mean by that is, we all will have to go through grief and loss at some stage in our life. We lose sort of elderly members of our family. And that grief affects us. At any age, it affects us. We've moved and we migrated to a different country, and that can be challenging as well. We will have difficulties with medical conditions and problems that affect us as different parts. And when you look at younger people, growing up is in itself a stress. You see, if you can think of an infant, they're just born and he or she's sort of trying to understand the world around them. And how they do that is through relationship. So human babies, when you think about it, even though we are the most evolved mammal, our babies, our infants are probably most immature at birth compared to all other mammals. So we are able to survive as a race because of that relationship. So we like to build relationship, and that relationship helps us move forward. That relationship helps us understand ourselves. So challenges, in different ways. So it can start with potentially a developmental issue early on. So it can be a difficulty with, maybe delay in developing speech and language, or delay in attaining milestones early on. Or it can then evolve into, for 3-4-year-old kid where they are struggling with separation from their parents when you're starting sort of childcare, or, the early days of school, which then can evolve as, difficulties in engagement at school, or refusing to go to school. Or it can be then issues with academic performance at school. Uh, and then it can evolve into kind of difficulties, if they are exposed to things like bullying. It can be difficulties in, developing into social anxiety and other anxiety disorders. So it sort of evolves. So it's would be a bit hard to kind of say signs and symptoms for children and sort of young people, all age groups. But that relationship is the key, and that helps us to get through these stresses.
Thank you. There are some comments coming in, so I'm just going to show them. And oh, hello, Zina. Is it that? Okay. Um, Hello, Swati. There you go, Arun and Rintu. Led by inspiring people.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swati. Um, so when children have mood swings and they have anxiety, Arun, and they have eating disorders, is it also eating disorders? Would you define that as part of mental health? I know mood swings can be, you never know what happens. Anxiety, especially, like you said, separation anxiety, going to childcare, not performing well.
Yeah, they are all part of mental health. I guess, it's all about mental well-being, and anxiety disorders are a common condition that you see with children, or for that matter, all age group. Anxiety is quite common, and in a way, anxiety is protective. As we know, I mean, that initial anxiety helps us perform better. So if you think about anxiety on a y-axis and performance on a y-axis and anxiety on an x-axis, as the anxiety sort of increases, your performance increases to a certain point, and then the performance starts to drop off. So it's like a bell curve. So performance increases, and then it peaks, and then it starts to drop. So too much of anxiety is the problem. Anxiety is there to kind of help us understand if something is going to be wrong. I need to make sure I am taking precaution for that. I need to be anxious. I need to be anxious while crossing the road. So if you're not anxious, you are likely to hurt yourself, because you're not able to risk screen, and you're not able to manage risk effectively. So anxiety is good, but at the same time, as you have more anxiety, it gets us into trouble. And that can come across as, when you look at anxiety, it can be specific phobias, where, which is essentially being fearful of a particular object or situation. So it can be fearful of, not wanting to fly, or fearful of blood, or it can be, social anxiety, which is this fear that I'm going to be clumsy, I'm going to be silly, or I'm going to embarrass myself in social situation, which can be sort of eating in public or going to public toilet, or it can be a generalized anxiety where, a young person may find themselves being anxious most of the time. They would kind of feel tired in themselves, they feel kind of keyed up or wired up most of the time. Their body is sort of stressed and the muscles are tense, they're struggling with sleep. So that sort of generalized anxiety. So again, anxiety disorder in itself is quite sort of, there's a broad variety of that. And then comes trauma. So if you've got a traumatic experience, then that affects anxiety. So that brings in, a different level, that we call it as PTSD or other stress disorders. And then you talked about eating disorder, and clearly, there is eating disorder affects not just mental health; it affects your physical health, and it affects your development. Because as we know, and as you lose your body weight, we are talking about anorexia here. And eating disorder doesn't mean just anorexia.
Yes.
Within eating disorder, you've got anorexia, you've got
Yes.
bulimia
Bulimia.
nervosa,
Yeah.
you've got binge eating disorder, you've got, ARFID, which is the sort of restricted feeding problems. So there's a number of eating disorders within that group. But if you can imagine, if a young child is losing weight, and they, once they drop beyond a certain stage, and if they are still not, if they're still restricting taking energy in, then our brain doesn't have energy to function. Then the brain is not able to problem solve. Then the brain is not able to think properly. Brain can't manage emotions well. Brain can't manage stress well. So while eating disorder in itself is a problem, it can then create multiple other issues as well. Um, yeah. So these are complex problems. Um, yeah.
That was
Um,
so well explained by you, Arun.
Very
Because
well explained. I'm just like,
yeah, because this anxiety, the that you explained that in the initial stages, anxiety lets a student perform better, but then after a stage, it just leads to a drop in the performance. That is so true, and we see that so much in our students. Like just last week, there was a class test in one of my classes, and this girl, she suffers from anxiety disorder. It was a short test, it wasn't like really an exam or anything, but she was so anxious about it. She sent me an email just before the test that, can I take the test later because I'm really anxious about this. So I was wondering, if she's so anxious, why couldn't she prepare for it? Why couldn't, but as you explained, it's just something that, they're feeling helpless about. They just can't, um, you know, probably if she had just studied a little, she could have sat the test. But just that anxiety is, making her so stressed that she can't even take that short test. So it does, we see that among students so much, this anxiety disorder. And with the eating disorder, I think that comes from body shaming as well, because that is
oh,
so
huge.
common
Yes.
amongst, adolescents in this day and age.
Even now, amongst not, I won't say kindergarten, but primary school kids, there's so much of body shaming. All these celebrities, they put up pictures of themselves which are so unattainable and
That's
also so Photoshop.
yes,
And the,
Social.
Yeah, there's also the other issue of that absolutely there's sort of photoshops and body shaming and undue importance to how we look rather than so who we are is defined by how we look and and how our body is. But also another big risk that's emerging is this sort of almost obsessive attitude towards healthy food, because food is it's important to kind of think about food as its nutrition, we know that, Food is relationship. Food brings families together. When we have any whether it's Diwali, Christmas, whatever,
We
wherever
have
you
many
celebrate
festivals. Yes, yes.
it's right. It's all about food. It's that sort of that dinner before for Christmas, or the Christmas lunch, or the lunch for Onam, in southern part of India. So it brings people together. It's then about your culture. So food is not just nutrition and relationship. It's also a relationship to your culture and who you are. So you kind of you expose yourself to Thai culture or the Greek cuisine, and that's important as well. So when you get to look at food as carbohydrates and proteins and sugars, all of a sudden you're starting to miss the wholesome nature of food, that nourishing nature of food. And that's tricky as well. So I'm not, so if you're kind of relying on a particular diet to be healthy, or if you are sort of depending on, I'm not going to eat for this many hours, or I'm going to do that,
Yes.
then then
Intermittent fasting. That's the new
that's
thing.
Yes,
and
that's
again, I'm not going to get into any of those specific, but even with intermittent fasting, you can think about the focus now is all about when am I going to eat,
Yes,
rather than
I would
what am
too.
I going to eat and how am I going to eat it. So all those other aspects of food can be lost. I'm saying can be lost. I mean, all if people find it effective and if that's what works for them, please, do what you want to do, but just keeping that in mind that it's important to see food as a whole rather than just its micronutrients and and how and when you eat it. So they all play a role.
Arun, I have a question for you. How does one encourage a child to break free of always wanting to be the best and cannot handle being the average child for something?
I think, it's important to it's a tricky question. I mean, how do you do that? It's sort of specific to each child. uh, it's this vulnerability in us that if we are not the best, then we are not good enough, which is actually not true. And I think schools, somebody you can sort of probably could have help here as well. Schools really, my 8-year-old daughter came in today, and she was a week ago, and sort of saying, we've got this cross country race, and apparently the teacher told her that it's not about winning, it's about taking part in
participate.
that race. It's
Participating.
actually being able to enjoy the race. And
Exactly.
that's and that's a message I think we need to kind of set by example as a family, that it's important for us to be able to enjoy what we do. It's being able to enjoy what we learn. When you think about a 2-year-old child, they learn a lot, and nobody's teaching them. The vocabulary of a child increases dramatically from being 1 to 4. Nobody's teaching them, they're picking it up. So children's brain are like a sponge. They are ready to absorb new information, they are ready to learn from what's happening around them. And it's encouraging that and making that fun, rather than kind of saying that if you don't do this, if you have that target, that comes later on in our life. We kind of have to get that done by this thing, or if you don't get that percentage, you may not get through. And we need to be careful not to get our kids into that. So that culture of its participation, its enjoyment, it's being part of it, that's key. And it's family, it's through modeling, it's through school, it comes from everywhere.
In this context, I would just like to ask you, and also just have an opinion about the fact that some parents push their kids so much in school just to just to get into select entry schools, or you know and sometimes we've seen that if the child you know did not perform very well, did not get a chance into select entry school, that child is like, in fact, I know of one particular child who's suffering from so much anxiety because her parents want her to get into the select entry school, but she feels that she will not be able to perform that well. So, would you say this sort of pushing by the parents is healthy for the child?
No, I mean, it's never healthy. It's I guess, when so what does research tell us? If you even look at bullying, and studies around bullying, what we know, the parenting style that works best, that protects a child from bullying, is that parenting where you can balance a child-centered, accepting parenting, which is balanced with somewhat being able to put in firm boundaries and expectations. Okay. Not, you do need boundaries, you do need expectations as a parent, but you also need those expectations to center around your child's needs, child's wishes, and their interests. You need to be able to accept your child for who they are, and it's very important as they're getting older. As you When you think about a young child, before 11, 12, they are always, they see themselves as part of parents. They kind of, their identity revolves around their parents. As they're getting older, as they get into adolescence, their brain is actually telling them to kind of create their own identity, find out who they are and what they are. And that's, as a parent, it's important for us to be able to transition from parenting a prepubertal kid to a parenting an adolescent, which is around trying to understand what are their interests, what do they like, what are their strengths, what are their challenges, and to then plan and give them expectations with their needs in mind. And if you're missing that, that'll be hard. There may be a child out there who's kind of needs a little bit of push here and there, and they may be happy with that. We have come across young people who would kind of say, look, I do need a little bit of nudge. I'm going to kind of procrastinate. I do need a bit of push. And how do we build a relationship with our child that they are able to say that? They're able to say that, mom or dad, can you just make sure I wake me up in the morning, and if I'm not getting up, can you just make sure you sort of give me a bit extra push? And that's where we need to get to. It has to sort of come from them. So if we miss that, if we miss those their needs, if we miss what they are looking for, and then give them expectations which kind of revolve around what we want to do, we are potentially going to do a fair bit of damage than good.
And I think at some point of time, as parents, we've all been guilty of that,
Yeah,
pushing our kids to do what
absolutely.
we couldn't achieve in our lives. And especially, we have this thing about, oh, we moved overseas for you, so
Yeah,
that you can get a better life.
yeah,
But we also moved for ourselves,
that's right.
so that we
Yes.
get a better life too.
That's right. And
Um,
that's inherent in us, isn't it? That's inherent in about, that's where how we started, I guess, human race of wanting to do better. We want
yeah,
our children to do better than how we did. We want to parent them better than how we were parented. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
and that's completely fine. So, I don't think we should feel guilty about it. But being aware that that's my fantasy. I mean, I always wanted to learn piano, and I kind of want to expose my child to piano. Now, I can't expect her to be a pianist. So if I insist that the only thing she can be is a pianist,
Yeah.
that's asking for trouble. But if I can think about it in a way that I want her to learn piano, that she is able to enjoy piano in her life more, that might help her. So it's okay to have fantasies about our kids. It's okay to dream about our children, because that's what
As
makes
a
us.
parent, I suppose you do
That's
that.
right.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's I wouldn't say don't do that. Always dream, always fantasize, but sort of also check with them what their needs are. One of the pediatricians talks about this. She apparently came back from one work once, and she had this sort of 5-year-old child who got into her bag and got pricked up a stethoscope and was sort of and she says, "Oh, I immediately thought in my mind, you're going to be a doctor.
Yeah.
Really, you got that." And then she sort of says, she holds this stethoscope by her mouth and kind of says, "Do you want some chips with it?" She's actually she's actually playing checkout counter at
Yes,
Macca's.
it's
you know
like a check.
and it's and it's being able to be okay with it, have that fantasy of wanting your child to be a doctor, but at the same time, how silly am I?
This is so good. Uh, Thank you for watching, Riju. There, Arun.
Thank you. Thanks, Saptarshi.
I have a few questions, but I will go to that in a bit. But Rintu, I want to ask you. We all know, there's a prevalence of bullying in schools. What is the age group that you see that kids are being bullied? Is it primary? Is it secondary? Is it both?
It's both, Saleha, because I teach in a secondary college, but
Yep.
I've had students who suffer from anxiety disorder and other stress and trauma because they've been bullied in primary school. So I had this girl a couple of years back in my year 12 class who had terrible anxiety disorders, and she wouldn't be able to concentrate or finish any of the tasks, and she used to go frequently to the well-being department. So one day I sort of, she was having a conversation with me, and she told me that she had been bullied so badly in primary school that she just couldn't get over it. She just suffered because of that. So I was a bit surprised. This was in my initial years of teaching here, and I was a bit surprised that what happened in primary school, does that affect you even now? She said yes, she can't concentrate, and she can't perform well because of the bullying that happened to her in primary school. So yes, it does happen. Like what I have seen, it does. Like it happens in primary and secondary, and it has that long-term effect. And because of that, students can't perform. They can't build any other relationship with other students, with other peers. Um, that sort of, that just sort of carries on from primary school to secondary school. And of course, in secondary school, as bullying takes different forms, that just exclusion, just not including friends, in a social event, and also, of course, cyberbullying that happens. So yes, it is very much there in the classroom, in the yard, and as I said, the well-being department, deals with it. I would say quite promptly, very very promptly. Sometimes we do notice that students get taken out of one home group and put into another class because bullying that's going on between two students have been reported. And there are other students who go and report it, other than the student
The
who's just
students are standing up.
yeah, which is a good thing because sometimes students can't speak out for themselves. They're too embarrassed or shy. But that's a good thing that there are other students who go and talk to the head of the house or the well-being coordinator that this is going on in class. This needs to be looked into, and so suitable action does get taken. And yeah, so it's surprising that I'm speaking about this on this topic tonight, and just this afternoon I got an email from a parent of a student of mine, and I'll just tell you in short what she has written to me. She has written a long email about her son suffering from anxiety, and she said that he must not know, like she has sort of told the teachers, but we should not let the student know that she has told us. And she has said that she doesn't know why she just started noticing that the student who was really enthusiastic about camps and other outdoor activities started avoiding it, and she didn't know that she didn't know that outdoor education, which is an elective subject, involves camps. So she paid for it, but then she realized that her son was just every time there was a camp, he was complaining of some sickness, so that he wouldn't have to go for the camp. And now she has realized that he's being excluded. He's being excluded by his friends. Um, so what she has written to me, I'll just read one line. Like I'm not quoting her on it, anything, but um, so he so when he comes into class, the other students just move away from him, and when he talks to them, he's not getting included, and all the students are moving away from him or planning social events in front of him. But when he tries to join in, they say he's not welcome.
Wow.
So
Wow.
imagine, yes, and he's tried to ask them one on one, but no answers were given. So this is just an email, and it's a long email. And this is what she's written to me, that his large circle of friends have been ghosting him, leaving him out, not talking to him when he talks to them, and not including him, and getting up, what I just said, getting up in classes and all, moving away from him. So this is an email, and there are lots of other issues that she has written in that email. But this is just something that I got as an email in the afternoon. So this is kind of thing that goes on in schools, and parents do let the teachers know, and do let the. I'm sure she has written to the well-being department as well, and I hope some action will be taken soon. So yeah, it is quite scary out there. But as Arun said, we are moving forward. Steps are being taken, and I'm sure that with the proper steps taken, things will improve. Things we have to improve.
Thank you. I'm going to, Arun, I think this question is for you. What if the child just wants to be good at what they do? There is no parental pressure, and the school is pretty. The child fears his own abilities.
Uh, I guess that's sort of talking about this parental expectation. Every child needs expectations as well. So it's that balance, really. I mean, if they are good at something, it's sort of exploring them, helping them continue to improve on that. I mean, schools use this all the time. I don't know something, then they correct you by saying you don't know that yet. So if you are if you are interested in cricket, how do you sort of continue to sort of improve in that, and then helping them as they're getting older, having expectations around, like, hey, you're doing well here, but what else have you thought about your career pathway? Where would you like to see yourself in 5 years, in 10 years? And that's important for them to have that as well. So it's not that when I say parental pressure, it's not pressure. It's sort of understanding where your child is and what they're good at, what their needs are, and giving them expectations that they can succeed, and then bringing the bar of that expectation higher. That's what
Absolutely.
helps them. So you can't just sort of say, oh, my, you can't just accept your child and kind of say, my child likes to play cricket and that's what he does, and I don't care about anything else. That's not sort of parenting either. So that's just acceptance, but no firm boundaries and no expectations. See, that's not helpful either. We need to find that balance. Research uses the term kind of child-centered, accepting parenting balance with authoritative parenting. I find authoritative a bit of a harsh word, and sometimes not properly understood. What it means is having firm boundaries and for reasonable expectations. So that has to be there as well, because you don't want them to lose that desire to wanting to learn. It's how do you create that in them? How do you want them to be what they want to be? How do you want them find help them find that desire to excel in whatever they want to do, rather than kind of you pushing that on them, and being able to enjoy life, finding meaning in life, and finding that it's not just the goal that you want to get to. It's actually the journey is equally important.
Of
um,
course.
yeah, just on bullying. I mean, Ron, it's a bit hard to get numbers, because it's the bullying is so different, and so you can sort of generalize for Australia, and that may not be true for a particular school.
Yes.
So it has to be carefully monitored. I mean, 1 in 4 kids I mean, around 1 in 4 kids in Australia are supposed to be bullied, and it peaks around that sort of mid-primary and during transition time. So when you are transitioning from primary to high school, so probably sort of around year 5, and then it peaks again at sort of year 7, year 8. And then as you're getting older, some of the research sort of suggests that maybe bullying does reduce a little bit, but that's kind of where the peak is from studies that we know. But it's again very important to kind of think about bullying as there is the individual perspective of bullying, so, and that needs to be identified, and we need to look at how we change that behavior and how we support that. But there is also the social cultural aspect of the
Which is what
school.
I was going to ask you. Yes.
Yeah, so that's equally important. So it's very important not to get, thinking about bullying as, oh, there is a bully, there is a victim, and then sometimes you talk about the victim bully, as in a child who's bullied, then becomes a bully himself.
Yes.
Because by sort of thinking about it that way, you're actually then putting kind of blame into this young person or that group of young people, and that's probably not going to be helpful, by making, for example, you have a victim, and then kind of by making them a victim, you are actually potentially, as Sarmita was sort of talking about, you can potentially isolate them in that group. So, yep, we need to look into individual aspects of it. There needs to be solutions around how are we going to manage this behavior, how are we managing this group of young people. But we also need to really look at how are we going to manage the social and cultural aspects of the school, where this behavior is actually not accepted, where you sort of say, if I am a bully, is actually a shameful thing to be. So that's important as well. And we also know from research that bullying that sees family or home separate to school, bullying interventions that actually take school separate, home separate, actually is not that effective either. So you kind of have to have a sort of whole of school community approach, sort of bringing students, teachers, parents, and carers all together. So that's sort of the key in how you address bullying. Yeah. So it's like,
So, Arun, this is again from Beyond Blue. Almost one-fifth of all children or young people aged 11 to 17 years experience high or very high levels of psychological distress. How do you know that your child is going through mental health issue due to bullying? Not everybody will be like, Sharmita's student who will tell their parents, especially, when you're in that 8 to, let's say, 9 to 15 years, you start answering in monosyllables. How is school? Yeah. You know how children talk. I mean, a lot of them just don't open up. So if I'm a parent of a 9 or a 10-year-old child, whether it's a boy or a girl, and I was speaking to a psychologist a few years ago, and he said to me that if you think girls are not nasty, you have to think again, because they can be worse than boys. He said sometimes boys just hit each other, at the playground, and maybe that's all over. With the girls, it just continues. I don't know if it has. I've asked my girls; they have said they haven't been bullied, but that may not be true for many people. So what are the typical signs, especially if kids are not opening up to their parents? And I know anxiety is one, mood swings are another one. But are there any
yeah.
physical signs?
No, yeah. So just sort of, taking a step back, you're right. Up until sort of that year six, kids generally, the first people kids talk to about being bullied are parents.
Yep.
you know from year 7 and above, and this is from research.
Yes,
Now
of
this is,
course.
individual children can be different, and
Yes.
individual family circumstances are different, and year 7 and above, they're likely to talk more to their friends. So this sort of goes back to this one thing that, keeping again, that relationship between the child and the parent. How closely do you know your child? What is actually happening with your child, and that's important to kind of build that, and the parent knows that best. And then as they're getting into their high school, sometimes you kind of say, why do you send your child to a private school? Why can't you send them to a public school? I mean, the reason why sometimes parents pick a school is actually for making sure they get into the particular peer group, because education can be the same. And if they've got educational skills, they're going to pick it up. It's actually, by private school, sometimes you're actually buying is actually peer relationships. So kind of
Yeah.
getting to know your child and their friendship groups, because that's where they're going to talk. And that's okay, because that's developmentally what their brain is telling them to do. Connect more to your peer group. Your peers know more than your parents. That's we've all been there. At
Yes,
15,
we've all
16,
done
it's
that.
all
Yeah.
about,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
about my friend knows more than mom or dad. and
Yes,
and
of
that's
course.
okay.
All the time.
And as mom and dad, we make sure they've got good friendship groups. Now, science, it's complex. It's not as simple as to say that that incident of bullying happened and that results in this. So how bullying impacts on a particular young person depends on multitudes of factors. Some young people may be bullied and they may come back home and kind of say that, look, I was bullied, and the mom may have or dad may have a good relationship with the teacher, and you take it up with PTA, and the school is absolutely not tolerating it. All of a sudden there's this incident of bullying that happens, and then the child sees adults around them taking it quite seriously and managing it sensitively. Now, in a whole, you can sort of see that as probably something that builds their resilience. On the other hand, you can have this where the child is not even believed. Okay? And then the
Oh,
child thinks,
does that
yeah,
happen?
because I mean, how do you define bullying? I mean, if you go to a school, if you talk to parents, I guess sort of, we talked about this briefly the other day. When a child comes to you and kind of say, I'm picked up, I'm being picked on by this group of kids. They call me that I'm silly and I'm nasty, I'm a stupid, and then the dad may be telling the child that, oh, that's not bullying. Look at me, when I was at school, I was punched, I was kicked, I had bleeding from my face. That is what bullying is. So by
Mhm.
telling your child that, you're actually telling him or her
That I
that
don't
what you
believe
are
you.
experiencing is
Yes,
not even bullying. So it's not even at school. It can even happen at home where the child is actually not believed. So it can be this spectrum of thing that can happen, and how does it then come out? It can come in, I mean, I'm generalizing here. We may start seeing difficulties with school engagement. So the child who's previously going to school now all of a sudden is a bit kind of reluctant to go to school. They're kind of not getting invited into birthday parties, or they're not kind of wanting to invite a lot of kids back to their birthday parties, and things like that. We may start to see some difficulties in their academic engagement, or general social engagement at school. So those are probably some of the early warning signs
son.
before it gets into other mental health conditions. Because again, once you're talking about mental health problems, you're talking about genetics, and a lot of other factors, not just sort of one incident of bullying. So keeping a good relationship with your child is important. A good relationship with school is important. Go to school, meet with your teachers, uh, you know make sure they know you, and you know them. Make sure that the school knows what bullying is, and parents can do a lot about that. Be active part of your PTAs and things like that. Because how do you know this is a problem? You won't know that until you are able to define it. Thankfully in Australia we do have a definition for bullying for Australian schools, but it's important that the whole of school community is able to sort of accept that definition of bullying and accept that this is what bullying is. So that's probably what I would say is kind of how you manage it, and these are some of the early signs of your child probably struggling with bullying. I've probably
Um,
gone a slightly different tangent there. So sorry.
no, that's all right.
It's a problem
Arun,
with
there
child
you go.
psychiatrists. Thanks, Sina.
You obviously haven't gone off tangent. So,
And that's
uh,
interesting that you say, there is some evidence to suggest that children of parents who were bullied themselves are more at risk of being bullied.
wow.
So, what does that tell us? So again, I'm very mindful that we've got a very short time, and I don't want to get into topics that I don't have time to kind of
Yes,
elaborate and think about, because these are complex issues. It's not quite like a simple causal response. He was bullied and this happened. Because if you start to think it that way, then our solutions are going to be wrong. It's not exactly that. There's multitude of factors, and I don't want parents to feel guilty either. Sometimes your child is bullied because they stand out, because they are smart.
and
Another
and
risk
and,
factor.
and Sarmita and I talked about it the other
That
day.
happens
That's
well.
If
right.
That
you're a
happens
smart
quite
kid, you
often.
get bullied. Yes.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
That's right. Because it's hard for us to
Mm,
accept anything that's a bit different.
that's
So
right.
being smart is different, or being of a different race can be different.
Yes,
Yes.
Having a disability can be different. So
yes.
it's multifactorial, and yeah.
Before we end, I want to ask about cyberbullying. Um, few years ago. I'm talking about, well, Facebook had come in, and you had little groups. Somebody I knew, a single mom, her daughter wanted her daughter came and asked her for a $200 pair of shoes, and she couldn't afford it. She was a single mom. She had other kids, and she said, "I can't afford it." And she was like, the daughter was like, "No, I need it because all my friends are wearing this particular pair of shoes, and if I don't wear it, I'm not going to be part of the in group." So there's also pressure from children to fit in. Then she was being bullied. There was cyberbullying happening, and girls of her age must have been about 10, 11 then. Calling her names again, not inviting her, talking behind her back. And when you're being excluded from events, from birthdays, and these are such huge things in children's lives. For us, maybe it doesn't make a difference, or maybe it does if we are not invited to a dinner and we know that our other friend has been. It affects us. So for children who are 10 and 12, it certainly affects them. So how do you tackle cyberbullying, which is a menace actually? And we know about cases in Canada where the girl killed herself. You remember a few years ago, a girl killed herself because she was bullied so badly.
So we have had that in Queensland as well. So this is it's happened in Australia as well, not only in Canada. And how do you prevent that? Again, it's a complex question. I guess it starts at home, really. I mean, getting to know your child, getting to know what they are into. Bullying, whether it's cyberbullying or whether it's face to face, it is physical in nature. It can be verbal, and then there is the psychosocial, as in psychological bullying and social bullying. And some bullying is overt, and some bullying is covert, in the sense that you don't say anything. I'm not telling you anything. I haven't told you anything bad, but I'm actually telling other friends not to talk to you.
Yes.
It's sort of that bullying by exclusion. And what the new having social media and having all these new sort of smartphones have done, it actually has got that on steroids. It's always
Yes.
been there. It's always been on the school yards, and now it's on steroids, with these things, with these platforms. And the other thing that can happen, by definition, bullying is something that has to be repeated. But with cyberbullying, you can actually put up a picture of you or a comment about you, and you don't have to repeat it, because it gets repeated itself. Because it gets repeated, it's there on the website. Others may share it, and others may comment on it. So just one incident can in itself be a repetition. So it's very tricky. It's very tricky. But at the same time, these are the things that young people used to learn. This is how they connect with their world. So cutting them off, saying that at 15, no, I'm not going to give you a phone, itself may not work, because every other child in the group has got a phone. Okay, so see, really, finding that balance between how, again, that sort of, acceptance, knowing your child, but having those firm boundaries, and that depends, that's individual to individual parent and child relationship. How can I, are you going to monitor your child's Facebook? I mean, if you have a relationship where the child is okay to do that, do that. But if that's going to create problems, that's going to cause a rupture in your relationship, I would say be cautious about it, and be very careful how you go about that. So really keeping that relationship with your child, educating them about what's okay in the cyber world, what to put, sort of monitoring, as in telling them what not to put as well. So giving that sort of frank education. Schools are playing a big role there as well. There are a lot of
Yeah,
resources out there to for help parents to kind of monitor
yeah.
what's happening.
There are lots of
And
restorative conversations that go on with the principal class and the leaders, the house leaders, and the person who has been bullied and who has like put up um, some name or something, name calling and all that. There are restorative conversations which go on, and that's the way they try to manage it. But it still goes on. Like it does happen sometimes. But as soon as the
and
school knows about it, they do step in and try to take an action. Um, yeah. So,
and having a relationship with other parents as well, because they would actually call out you and kind of say, we saw that, is this happening in the chat group, because
Yeah.
always, if there's a group of 5 or 6 young people, the others may be picking up as well, so having a reasonably good relationship with that circle, so that helps.
Do you think
It,
enough is being done at schools? I'm
I
asking
would
both.
say so. Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that different schools are different. Some schools are well resourced, and they do a really great job. They do have a culture that it's like racism in a way. I mean, to be racist is not okay. I mean, yeah, I know it may be still there, but if you're a racist, that's not okay. That's not cool anymore. I mean, it's not accepted in the society, and there are schools where being a bully is frowned upon, and it's not the culture of the school, and but then there are other schools where for multiple reasons, they may have 3,000 kids, and it's poorly resourced, and they come from low socioeconomic group, and the parents are not engaged, and they are probably struggling. So I guess the answer is yes and no.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree with that
that's the.
because, yeah, in some schools there's a no tolerance policy to bullying and bullying, but in some schools, the well-being department may not be as well resourced, and as you mentioned, the cohort of students may be different, and not such well-resourced schools may not be able to deal with this problem as effectively as some other schools.
Thank you. I think we have time for this tonight. It's nearly an hour. We had said we'd do half an hour to 40 minutes. And to
Good
everyone,
to hear, Arun. I wish I had heard you, speaking before I brought up my sons, because that was so enlightening what you were saying, and I wish I could go back and make a few changes in
but
my
but,
parenting.
but Sarmita, that's what I
we've
mean.
all done that. We've all done that. We know we are. We are
That's
all Indian parents. Even if we say now we never pressured our kids, I think in our own way, we all have. And our kids have done well, pressured or
that's
no pressure. I like to think I never pressured my girls, but who
but that's
knows?
what I want to say. I mean, we don't have to be perfect. We just need to be good enough. See, and I think
Mm,
almost 99 percentage of parents do well. So it's you can't always get it right. You want to be reflective, but
Yes,
when you are busy trying to get to work, or when you've got other things, it's just not going to happen. So that it's important. The biggest mistake to do is to feel guilty about things, about what you're doing and how you do things. It's about sort of, sometimes we kind of have to accept that, yep, things are a bit tricky here. How do I change? But that doesn't mean I'm a bad parent,
mm.
because really you're not. You really want to do the best thing for your child. That's what you're trying
absolutely.
to do. And
And
I just want to
parenting
finish it.
doesn't come with a rule book.
No,
You just
no,
do your best.
You
no.
just you
You do,
just
That's
especially
learn.
right.
for people like
Yeah,
us who have migrated. We don't have extended
yeah.
families with
That's right.
us. We just make the best
Yeah.
of it. Okay. Oh,
And
I
every child is different as well. And can I say
absolutely.
one last
Yes,
thing before we finish
I
it?
am also
Because I
going to show you something before you say anything. Yeah, Arun, both.
thank you,
Thank
thanks.
you, thank you,
Thank you.
Zina.
I just want to say that the other big shift that's happened recently is that there's a lot of treatment for mental health conditions in children and young people as well. So unlike how things were 20 years ago, we now know that psychological interventions do work. We now know that if we need to be, along with psychological interventions, medications are quite useful. And we know that with intervention, actually, kids do quite well. So it's important not to kind of ignore these things, not to get caught up in the stigma of this either,
Yes.
So
And
so
that's
it's
a
it's,
big
it's
thing amongst us, isn't it? We don't want to talk about it.
uh, no,
What will the
yeah,
community say? Because we are
that's
so worried about our communities. Yes,
that's
there
right,
is no stigma.
that's right,
And which is why, if any of the parents watching, you need assistance, the kids helpline numbers are below on the ticker. Please use them. There are national numbers and there are also state numbers. So thank you, Arun. Thank you, Sarmita.
Thanks, Sarmita.
wholesome
Thank
discussion.
Nice meeting you,
I
Sarah.
hope we can come back and discuss this a little bit more.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you
night.
for joining.